Hey guys, Jeff Beers here from the 40 Finance channel. Do another stock comparison today. We're looking at Intel versus AMD. It's a little bit of a David versus Goliath game, but we'll see who comes out on top in terms of stock fundamentals, growth prospects, all those things. And if you love this channel and you like what I'm doing, please like the channel, share the videos with your friends. I really appreciate it. It helps me get this thing off the ground. Let's dig in. Starting with Intel, and Intel is definitely the sort of behemoth of the CPU world. And you can see over the past 5 years, not incredible growth, but slow and steady growth. Currently trading about $50 with a PE ratio of only 15. They also have a dividend of 2.48%, which is kind of nice. And just real simply, over the years, Intel has performed well, but the nature of the sort of sector they're in, getting conglomerated with chips and stocks like Nvidia and Micron and all those things, it's always a rocky road because analysts are so granular about demand for chips and which way it's going, and the nature of the business is that you have to produce these chips in advance for demand that may or may not be there. Then you get backlogs, so on and so forth. So I think Intel as a company, in my opinion, is actually a little bit better than their current stock price. It's just this sector, guys, from an analyst perspective, they are so far deep in the weeds on this, and it's just really interesting how much time gets spent on the chip sector and phone sector, and yet some of these other technologies no one's even looking at. But, you know, I digress. All right, comparing Intel to advanced micro devices, and AMD's a really interesting story, and I mentioned David Goliath in the intro there, and they really are kind of a David in the sense that AMD's been around a long time, okay? They've been around since the 90s with the initial home computing boom, all those things. The problem for them is they almost ceased to exist, okay? They were in penny stock world, massive debt, accounting problems, all the bad signs that a company is going to die, AMD came out of, okay, with a long trek to get out of those things, but they did do it. And you can see over their past 5 years, they've really made a boom. They've really made a dent in the industry by catering to the holes that Intel doesn't fill. We'll look at those holes in a little bit. Advanced micro devices, though, it's currently trading at $20. P ratio is much higher than Intel at 63.95. It really is a growth story with AMD at this point. They are trying to stay on top and make progress towards their goals. It's the kind of company that you get excited about in this sector over the next 3 to 5 years to see what exactly can they do. And the only question is from a stock perspective, can we make more money over the longer term, 3 to 5 years, by investing in AMD's growth or Intel's current position as number one? And that's what we'll look into right now. Okay, looking at the analyst reports for Intel, right now the average target is 53.91. You've got 64 as the high target from analysts who follow this stock, and you got a low of 40. It all shakes out to be a so-called moderate buy, and that's just 15 votes to buy, 8 votes to hold, and 4 votes to sell. So when you think about the upside for Intel over the next 12-ish months, you got about 11% growth in stock price. Now that does not include the dividend. Okay, so you got to keep that in mind too. We had the 2.5 plus dividend that we mentioned earlier. It's not a heap of money on a $50 stock, but it does kind of contribute to the bottom line. So if you throw in 2.5% on the dividend, you're probably somewhere in the neighborhood of a 14% upside total. Doesn't exactly work that way, but it's enough to give us a comparison. Now let's take a look at how analysts see AMD's future over the next 12 months. Remember, their stock was right around the $19 mark, and they're getting a 29% upside projection up to $25.64. On the high side, you got analysts targeting 40, and on the low, you got 14. From a total standpoint of all the people that follow it, out of the best performing analysts, you got 11 buys, 12 holds, and 1 sell. So a little bit of uncertainty, but it still works out to be a moderate buying opportunity. And don't forget that a lot of news in chips and devices changes so quickly. So the sentiment in Q2 through Q4 for both of these companies could be drastically different as soon as these projections of laptop sales, phone sales, tablet, anything that would have chips in it. These analysts are tracking like a hawk. So as soon as those forecasts go up and down, all this sentiment changes, and it can happen essentially overnight. All right, so here we stack up all the core metrics for AMD versus Intel. You got AMD in this column, Intel in this column, and you can kind of see the difference, or you certainly can see the difference in size of the companies. So net income, $43 million for AMD, $9.6 billion for Intel. So pretty steep increase there. EPS of 8 cents versus $3.50. Trailing PE ratio is 247 for AMD, and Intel is 1395. Forward PE 37 versus 1063. Now that's a great number for AMD on forward PE, okay? So you're talking about a significant drop year over year. They're starting to become more profitable. And that's a key sign for a growing stock that debt starts to go down over time, profits increase. So while these are not apples to apples by any stretch of the imagination in comparison, the growth versus behemoth story certainly is here. P growth, $2.82 for AMD and only $1.29 for Intel. So there you kind of see the growth story happening. Net margins, only 5.51% for AMD, so it's costing them a lot more to make products, market products, than Intel, who's got a net margin of 21.91%. So a lot of work there to do. Return on equity, AMD's doing a good job having a much smaller company of a 47% return on equity versus Intel's 30%. Usually the bigger a company gets, even though you would figure economies of scale, all those things, but depending on your employees and how much you need to produce, you could actually get a little less return on equity as opposed to running a small shop where everything's all together. Dividend we sort of talked about. AMD does not have one. Intel, however, does. And they've years of consecutive dividend growth. You see here, Intel's grown it the past 4 years. So that's a nice win if you're comparing the stocks. However, I'm always looking more so for predictable growth than I am for dividends. The dividends for me are just a nice to have. But everyone has their different opinion on them. And if you're one of those people who needs to check the box that a stock pays a dividend in order to invest in it, I know that's a popular theory, Intel might fit the bill for you. All right, so why does Intel dominate so much over AMD in what amounts to a CPU chip, okay? Well, it's all about performance, and I pulled a couple examples. The first one here is from PC Gamer magazine, the best CPU for gaming, and then they sort of ranked them, had a number of charts on this article if you want to search for it. I happened to pull the first one I saw. And from a gaming rating that appears to go up to 120%, you got Intel. All the blue lines are Intel, okay, from a performance basis. Then you have 2 AMDs right below that and 3 AMDs on the bottom. So you can kind of see from the standard of performance. So if you're a high-end gamer or you spend a lot of your budget on gaming, if you're going after performance metrics, at least in the opinion of this publication, Intel is just absolutely dominating. And not only are they dominating, their sheer model variety in this top graph is kind of surprising to me. So that gives you a look at how Intel's winning right now. I like this slide because I think it demonstrates where AMD can win in the future, okay? So similar to the last, we see that Intel won this sort of best overall category from Tom's Hardware, best value, so most power per dollar. But then over here on AMD, this was kind of interesting to me, and you can see it reflected in the prices. AMD was the budget pick, okay, for gaming CPUs, and AMD was the entry-level pick for gaming CPUs. So what I see here and what this tells me makes this a little bit harder to pick a side if you're thinking about growth, okay? Because if AMD has found its niche and it's in budget and entry level, that could be a really interesting place to be as more and more people start gaming and have interest in gaming, okay? And as I've talked about in a few other videos, which I'll link to in the description, gaming is a growing industry. You guys have probably heard me talk about Turtle Beach. I also did a gaming stock overview just a little bit ago. If you can sort of grab some market share on the way in or in this budget and entry level area and perform well for your customers, it could lead to some pretty significant growth over the next 5+ years, particularly if you start to chip away at Intel's performance. So I guess for me, when I look at AMD, I see a lot of potential, okay, if they continue to keep growing the right way. I see potential to pick off a different type of gamer. It looks like they've lost the premium customer here in 2019. There's some work to go, and this is a nice place to be at premium because you're making $400 a sale versus $159, but you know that there's going to be more people on a budget than there is going to be running premium. So those are all things to keep in mind. All right, so the last sort of insight I have here is this article from Market Realist. Obviously leads with a record year for Intel as they're talking about 2018, and last year was a strong one for Intel, as it goes on to say. But what I found really interesting, given what I was just talking about in the budget space, an unexpected increase in PC sales created a supply shortage at the chip maker being Intel, which prioritized orders for high-end PC and server CPUs, leaving mid and low-range segments to be catered to by rival AMD. So, long story short, unexpected boost in sales in 2018, supplies diminished, they had to do some rush manufacturing, they prioritized the high-end orders, which I don't blame them. But that gave AMD an opportunity to come in and sell some of their low to mid-range product, which over time could really build a nice customer base. Now, you have to do it more than 1 year at a time, but it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier. So I think bottom line here, when you look at these two stocks, Intel for sure is the safest play, is the fundamental play, and you likely are not going to be disappointed over the next decade. However, if you're looking for growth with your stock portfolio, with stock prices that go up, earnings that will continue to grow, I think AMD's growth actually doubles over Intel in the next 3 to 5 years. It's not as stable of a thesis as Intel continuing to be who they are, but with any growth stock, you're going to have a little bit of risk. I like what AMD's doing. For me, I'm going to follow them for another 6 to 8 months, see what happens in the CPU market, learn a little bit more about it, but I might be a buyer in the future. All right, so hope you guys enjoyed this look at Intel versus AMD. My name's Jeff Beers. This is the 40 Finance channel. Hey, please like this video, share it with your friends. I really appreciate you spreading the word. We'll see you on the next video.